this Tuesday morning. My voice is okay because the Yankees got ahead of the Guardians fairly early last night, so it was not a yell at the TV night. I begin with a major story. Plagiarism is a big deal. You may not think that, you may not know that, but plagiarism is very serious. In the university world, of which I've been a part since 1996, one verified charge of plagiarism loses a tenured professor their tenure. It gets students expelled. It leads to the loss of research dollars. Why? It's a combination of lying, because you're claiming someone else's work for yourself, and theft, because you're stealing someone else's work, equaling fraud upon the institution for whom you work or upon the people for whom you are providing product or to whom you are selling product. Plagiarism is an unqualified bad thing. Kamala Harris is a plagiarist. We found that out yesterday because of the work of Christopher Rufo of the Manhattan Institute. Now, Christopher Rufo is a very serious man with a very long pedigree and an extraordinary ability to upset the left because he understands what matters and he writes persuasively. Yesterday, he published Kamala Harris's plagiarism problem at his Substack. It's ChristopherRufo.com. And he went through a report by an Australian professor who dives into allegations of plagiarism and who found in Kamala Harris's book before her run for California Attorney General, which she co-authored with Joan O.C. Hamilton. It's a small book. It's called Smart on Crime, A Career Prosecutor's Plan to Make Us Safer. It's a puff book. It's the kind of book a candidate puts out before a campaign. But with those kinds of books, you've got to be very careful when you hire a co-author, and I suspect that Ms. Hamilton did most of the writing, but Kamala Harris's name is on it. You've got to say at the beginning, be very careful. I'm a public figure, no plagiarism. Well, there are at least 12 instances of plagiarism in the book. 12. That's a lot. Now, Christopher Rufo details a number of these, including lifting verbatim language from an uncited NBC News report, another airlifted section from a John Jay College of Criminal Justice press release, a very long passage directly from Wikipedia, which is amusing and extraordinary because Wikipedia, nobody trusts Wikipedia. I tried to use a Wikipedia quote as a joke once in a Washington Post column, and they rejected the joke because they were afraid that someone would take it seriously. She lifted promotional language from an Urban Institute report. It goes on and on. So the story made it out yesterday. CNN picked it up pretty early on CNN.com. Conservative activist accuses Harris of plagiarizing passages in co-authored 2009 book. Notice it's not Harris accused of plagiarism. It's not Harris committed plagiarism. It's conservative activist accuses Harris of plagiarism. Then Newsweek came out with Kamala Harris, smart on crime plagiarism claims everything we know, and ran through it. The only mention it got yesterday, and it's the first day of the story, but it was yesterday, was on the 5. Greg Gutfeld brings it up. Let's play Greg bringing it up. Cut
Judge,
number.
So Kamala keeps saying, oh, she wants to separate herself from Joe. And then, of course, she gets accused of plagiarism, which, again, it puts her in sync with Joe.
Yeah, all right, so Greg Gutfeld brings it up. Later on Fox News, The Story, Jillian Turner is the host. She asked Tim Murtaugh, who works for Donald Trump. All right, Tim Murtaugh is part of the Trump campaign. Asked him about the plagiarism by Kamala Harris, cut number 23.
So, Tim, I want to make sure I get this in before I let you go very quickly, if you don't mind. She's going to sit down with Fox News Channel for the first time in history for an official interview. Your candidate's obviously been on with us hundreds of times. I don't know how many. Do you have any advice for her?
Sure. Come up with an answer that is somehow believable about how it is that you share yet another thing in common with Joe Biden. She's now accused of plagiarizing the book that she wrote about crime, stealing things from Wikipedia, of all sources. That's what she stands accused of. I'd love to hear an answer for that. Joe Biden had the same problem, as you may remember, the first time he ran for president. So one and the same, even including plagiarism.
That accusation, of course, coming
Now,
from...
Tim Murtaugh is very good, but he shouldn't say accused of plagiarism. She is guilty of plagiarism. Now, in The Telegraph, Great Britain's center-right newspaper, Poppy Coburn has a column this morning. The Kamala Harris plagiarism row is a disaster for her campaign. It threatens to compound the perception that she is out of ideas. That's true. What's interesting is it's in The Telegraph. It's not in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, and indeed you will not find any story at all in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post about the plagiarism. You will find a New York Times story that says, oh, it's minor, not a big deal. Well, Christopher Rufo last night took apart the New York Times response, and I want to read you what he said last night. The New York Times is lying about my plagiarism story, and I have the receipts to prove it. 1. The Times claimed that I only argued that Kamala Harris plagiarized, quote, 5 sections involving about 500 words. But this isn't true, writes Rufo. In my story, I wrote that Stephen Weber, the Australian, argued there were more than a dozen instances of vicious plagiarism. This past Saturday, I provided the New York Times not only with my written analysis, which argues that there were more than a dozen, but with Weber's full dossier, which included 18 allegations of varying severity. So the Times deliberately withheld this crucial contextual information from its readers and from the supposed plagiarism expert who, based on this limited information, called it not serious. They could have easily confirmed more than a dozen point, but instead they lied by omission. 2. The Times claimed that none of the passages in question took the ideas or thoughts of another writer. This is preposterous, concludes Rufo. Harris not only copied multiple paragraphs of other people's work verbatim, but she often lifted those ideas directly and at face value. In one case, she came to the wrong conclusion because she copied Wikipedia. In other words, i.e., she stole a very bad idea, copied the language verbatim, and got the point wrong. That's the full Monty of plagiarism. He continues. 3, the Times provides one example of plagiarism from my story, which suggests it was a minor copy and paste of 2 short sentences. But this is supremely misleading. The violation was not 2 sentences, but rather 5 sentences. And then he provides the actual context. 4, the Times suggests that noticing Kamala Harris's plagiarism is somehow racist, even though the paper has covered plagiarism by many other political figures. My rule, writes Rufo, of working with journalists is simple. If you treat me fairly, I treat you fairly. After publication of the Times piece, I called the reporter and editor at the Times to ask politely for correction. The editor, Mary Sue, had nothing but excuses, and so we're going to fight this one out. They should issue a correction, but even if they do not, I will correct the record in public. Kamala Harris now has another problem 3 weeks before the election. She is a plagiarist. Christopher Rufo brought the receipts. Read everything you can about it, and then look to see. This is the Hunter Biden laptop of 2020. Now, yesterday I told you, and earlier today I posted on my X account, Hugh Hewitt. And you can find this monologue later today at YouTube. I want you to send it, everyone. I posted today, and I told you yesterday, Gallup's new poll shows that trust in legacy media, in mainstream media, and whatever you want to call it, media, has reached an all-time low. Only 33% somewhat or totally trust the mainstream media. 36% say it's garbage and in-betweener opinions. It's the lowest number ever for mass media. That's what the term they use, mass media in the Gallup poll. Why? Because Americans watched the Hunter Biden laptop story get buried, only to discover that Hunter Biden has to go to jail because of it, because it was true, it was his laptop. And now we have Kamala Harris plagiarizing her one book. Now, I've written 14 books, and I know how hard it is to keep making sure, again and again, every day, that everything you write, I write my own books. I don't use a ghostwriter. I don't use a co-author. I've only co-authored one book with the great Hank Adler. It was on The Fair Tax Fantasy, he's the accountant, I'm the lawyer, so we're co-authored there, but we both checked each other's work because plagiarism does and ought to destroy the reputation of people who engage in it. I've been a writer for 35 years. I've been teaching since 1996. I've authored 14 books, countless articles, never been accused of plagiarism because I don't plagiarize. Because if you plagiarize, you are a fraud. You are a cheat, and you are lying, and you are stealing. Kamala Harris is a plagiarist, and there is no getting around that fact. And the United States legacy media is covering it up. Astonishing. Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene did a very bad thing to Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee. Food for the poor has rolled out in a big way. That's why the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I supported it on the first day that they began their emergency campaign for relief supplies. We said, come on in. We'll sponsor the program. We'll let you go forward with this fundraising drive, and thousands of you have contributed. Some have sent $10. Thank you. Some have sent $1,000. Thank you. Whatever you can afford. Governor DeSantis gave an update yesterday on Florida. This does not extend to North Carolina or East Tennessee, which have got major problems. This is Florida.
That is something that is making a difference, and you're continuing to see more and more gas stations as they get power, also get the fuel. It's not 100%, but they're making good progress. Now, we want to get this fuel in as quickly as possible. It's obviously not the state that runs where gas goes. This is all private industry, but we have been able to help escort fuel with Florida Highway Patrol, as well as some of our local law enforcement, to be able to get it where it needs to go as soon as possible since Milton made landfall.
Since Milton made landfall, there have been millions of people without power. It's down to 400,000 without power, but many people are displaced and in shelters. Food for the Poor provides the emergency kits. $100 provides one emergency kit, which are very, very useful, especially up in the mountains in North Carolina and East Tennessee. Whatever you can give. The banner's at hughhewitt.com. You cannot miss it. Thank you in advance for doing that. Let me also do the market report brought to you by our friends at American Federal. Nick Grovich and his team can be reached at 800-221-7694, 800-221-7694. One more time, 800-221-7694. If you've decided you want to buy gold or you want to sell gold, do it with Nick. Straightforward, honest, in business for 40-plus years, buying and selling gold. He makes a commission. He tells you what it is up front. It's the best, most secure place I know to buy bullion or buy maple leaves, Canadian maple leaves or American Eagles or Krugerrands. They're just very straightforward. I always have said, I've said since I've been on the radio, I believe in diversification, 10% of your wealth, at least 10% in gold and or dirt, then stocks and bonds and a good mix, so you're not exposed to anything. But gold has, for the more than 100 years, more than kept pace with inflation. Gold this morning, 2,670. It's stabilized because I think the market believes Trump's going to win. The market went up yesterday across the board. The Dow up 0.47, the S&P up 0.77%, NASDAQ up almost a point at 0.87%. And I think it's going to stay there because I think Trump's going to win and people are going to realize the tax cuts are not going to go away. We're not going to get hammered with an unconstitutional tax on unearned gains. I just think there's going to be an enormous relief when Trump wins that a radical Kamala Harris is not there. But if you want to sell your gold or you want to buy gold just as a hedge against Harris, do it with Nick Grovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com. MFed Gold and Bullion have been doing it for 40-plus years. 800-221-7694. Generalissimo, I did not have to worry about snacks during the Yankees-Guardians game last night because I was depressed. So I didn't really have to worry too much about snacks. I did stay until they were down by 3. Then when it started to prepare for bed, because I didn't think they were going to get 3 given the Yankees bullpen. But tonight it's the Aces, so we'll see. I would like to get one game there. I imagine you didn't watch it at all, did you?
Not even a pitch.
Okay. I began the show by summarizing for you the story that Kamala Harris is a plagiarist. There isn't actually a debate about this. She plagiarized. And that is a very serious thing. J.D. Vance yesterday brought it up on the campaign trail, cut number 19.
I saw today, actually, a story that Kamala Harris apparently copied some significant chunks of her book from Wikipedia. So if you want a president with their own ideas, vote for Donald Trump. If you want a president who copies her own ideas from Wikipedia, vote for Kamala Harris.
It's actually worse than that, J.D. Vance. If you want a president that you can trust to keep you safe and the country safe, vote for Donald Trump. If you want a president you can't even trust not to lie about a book, vote for Kamala Harris. Now, yesterday, Bill Clinton, the former president, Bill Clinton, was, quote, campaigning for Kamala Harris in Georgia, except he wasn't. It's beginning to look a lot like not Christmas, but that Biden and Clinton and Obama have decided short-term pain, long-term gain. We can't let her win. We'll get wiped out in 2 years. We're going to come out subtly against her. Because this is Bill Clinton yesterday at a fish fry. Let's do the long version. 1:12, Bill Clinton talking about Laken Riley, the victim of murder at the hands of an illegal migrant, cut number 4.
And on the immigration thing, she's the only candidate who has actually endorsed a bill that would hold down immigration in any given year to a certain point, and then make sure we gave people a decent place to live. We didn't divide people from their children. And we did total vetting before people got in. Now, Trump killed the bill. The bill was being written by senior Republicans in the Senate, and he killed the bill. Why? You had a case in Georgia not very long ago, didn't you? They made an ad about a young woman who'd been killed by an immigrant. Yeah, well, if they'd all been properly vetted, that probably wouldn't have happened. But if they're all properly vetted, and that doesn't happen, and America is not having enough babies to keep our populations up. So we need immigrants that have been vetted to do work.
Do you know that Bill Clinton just admitted that had Kamala Harris not been the border czar, been charged, direct quote, with stemming the flow across the southern border, close quote, Joe Biden on appointing Kamala Harris to run the border, if migrants had been properly vetted, Laken Riley would not be dead. So Bill Clinton makes the point that Kamala Harris is responsible for migrant crime. Guy Benson, on Special Report panel last night, emphasized just how damaging this is to Kamala Harris. Cut number 5.
Of course, you can't properly vet millions and millions of people who come into the country, who flood across the border. And so Bill Clinton gets some credit for mentioning that case, which is largely ignored conspicuously by a lot of the people in his party. But it really causes a problem for the argument that Harris is trying to make. He mentioned the bill, which was an election year gambit, to give them a talking point. But,
which, by the way, 6 Democrats voted against.
Correct. But even if you set that completely aside, that was cooked up in 2024. The man accused of killing Laken Riley entered the country illegally in 2022. A few days later, literally, Kamala Harris went on national television and said the border is secure. She denied a crisis was even happening and said the border was secure. Of course, it was not. That man went on to commit additional crimes in other sanctuary jurisdictions before allegedly killing Laken Riley. So even with the caveat from Bill Clinton with the timing of the bill, it doesn't actually excuse what happened there. And that might be a good question for someone to ask her if they get an opportunity at some point.
You want to write
Only
this stuff
Guy
down?
Benson can do that to Brett Baer. I really appreciate Guy's humor. We'll talk with Brett a little bit later today. Bottom line, you can't trust Kamala Harris. Bill Clinton knows it. I don't know if Bill Clinton intentionally put the shiv in, but Joe Biden's been shivving her. I just think they're cutting their losses. Now, Kamala Harris made an Indigenous Peoples Day statement yesterday. Cut number 6.
Since 1934, every October, the United States has recognized the voyage of the European explorers who first landed on the shores of the Americas. But that is not the whole story. That has never been the whole story. Those explorers ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetrating violence, stealing land, and spreading disease. We must not shy away from this shameful past, and we must shed light on it.
I just want to say, it did not devastate the continent. The tribes were not fairly dealt with, but it unleashed an era of prosperity and growth and an ongoing incremental increase in liberty and literacy around the world. We should be very proud of the American legacy and not ashamed of it. We should note that the tribes were not dealt with fairly, and they are only now beginning to recompense themselves via their recognition of sovereignty. Neil Gorsuch, their big advocate on the Supreme Court. But honestly, I thought for a second, is this Maya Rudolph or is this Kamala Harris? I had to see the picture because really, you're going to attack America for devastating America because of the English settlements on the colonies moving west. She really is an unserious person. She sat down with podcaster Roland Martin yesterday and said this, cut number 7.
But to your point, in Georgia, they passed a law preventing people from giving food and water to folks who are standing in line to vote, which is the height of hypocrisy. Because, you know, what happened to love thy neighbor, right?
This has been debunked so thoroughly that she no longer cares whether she... I think her numbers must be terrible. I think they're looking at a landslide. If she was ahead, she would not be agreeing to sit down with Brett. If she was ahead, she would not be doing everything she can. To quote the New York Times this morning, Harris steps up a major push for black voters. She is losing black voters? I mean, you should be stunned by that. But she was in a safe place with Roland, and she did what she always did when she's in a safe place. She let down her guard and went for the sky. Cut number 8.
You know, there's this whole, I talked with somebody once who said, you know, if you just look at where the stars are in the sky, don't look at them as just random things. If you just look at them as points, look at the constellation, what does it show you? So you just outlined it, Roland. What does it show you?
I love it when she goes philosophical. All right, she went to Erie, Pennsylvania yesterday. She had a big rally, big turnout. She's not going to win Erie County. I know Erie County pretty well. It's where I went to summer camp. It's about, 30 minutes from my home. Warren is Erie, Erie is Warren. Cut number 9. This one is a laugh for Kamala Harris in Erie yesterday.
That he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies.
How about that? Kamala Harris warning that Donald Trump will weaponize the DOJ. Remember, Donald Trump has been president. He did not go after any of his political opponents. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have unleashed the Department of Justice and have cooperated with New York State to do nothing but go after Donald Trump. They ought to have told David Ferriero, the archivist of the United States, when he sent the complaint over to Justice, work it out, will you? We're not going to go raid Mar-a-Lago in the look for papers. You know that every president takes papers that they should not take, and it takes years to go through it. We're not doing that. David, retire, go away. David Ferriero did retire. I hope Donald Trump replaces the archivist and they put in another archivist, and he ought to start over when he wins. One other thing I've got to say, Kamala Harris in Erie, Pennsylvania yesterday, cut number 11.
You guys watched the debate. Right. He has, quote, concepts of a plan. Concepts.
She's losing it. She's losing it. Now, let me tell you, where did that all come together? She's a plagiarist. She goes philosophical and makes no sense. Bill Clinton says to you, Lake and Riley got into the country, and she attacks the American ideal, the American project, by saying we devastated the land. You cannot trust Kamala Harris to keep you safe, your family safe, or the country safe. Indeed, you certainly can't count on her to keep our allies safe. Financial Times today has a big story on Israel races to supply its anti-missile shield. They need more weapons. We are not getting them to there fast enough because they're under constant attack by Hezbollah. 11 soldiers have been killed in Lebanon. The ground offensive is reviewed at great length in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Meanwhile, North Korea yesterday blew up all the roads heading to the south. A weird, weird day over there. Who handled Kim Jong-un the best? Donald Trump. He just calmed him down. A little bit nice to him. As he said on my program 10 days ago, When someone has nuclear weapons, you have to deal with them differently than when they don't. Kamala Harris will not help Israel, and she will not supply. She has not been asked any serious national security questions. She has not been asked if she will provide American support to an Israeli strike on Iran. She has not been asked if Israel has a right to respond. Donald Trump said, absolutely, they get a free shot. They got attacked twice. They get a chance to retaliate. She has not been asked about what percentage of GDP is the minimum percentage for this country. She has not been asked about our Navy. She's not been asked about anything having to do with national security. She doesn't know anything about national security. The most important question is, where are we going to get the power? Right? Today, there's a good story. Google orders small modular nuclear reactors for its data center. This comes only a week after Microsoft announced that it had bought 3 Mile Island in an effort to restart it. We need a lot more energy in the base load of electric energy in the United States, not just for your heating and air conditioning, not just to power your buildings, but to build AI and power supercomputing so we can keep up with the Chinese. Will Kamala Harris help build nuclear plants? No. California is the least friendly to electricity generation state in the union. And she was the attorney general who did nothing to solve that. Will she support Israel? No. They have a right to defend themselves. She has never said that they have the right to preempt attacks against themselves or to do what is necessary to prevent the annihilation of the Jewish state. She cannot be trusted to protect your family, as Bill Clinton pointed out. 10 million people unvetted into the United States. And that's before the phony bill was brought up that wasn't a bill, that had Jim Lankford and one other senator in favor of it. And Jim did the best job he could, but the Senate Republican Conference said it's not even close, and they rejected it. That myth is a myth. You just cannot trust Kamala Harris to keep you safe, the country safe, or our allies safe. Joined by David Drucker. That music always means David is in the house. David, let me begin with the plagiarism scandal. There is no doubt in my mind that Kamala Harris is, in fact, a plagiarist. So does it have an impact on the campaign?
I don't know that it does, Hugh, but it could. It's, I say this, and I've dealt with questions on this from both sides for both candidates at various points in the race over the last, however many years. We're in a very polarized era where most voters are locked into their side and their candidate. There is a small sliver, though not insignificant, but a small sliver of undecided voters. And these sorts of things, they could have an impact, but these things do not dominate and live in the news cycle the way they once did many years ago, when, you and I would experience these October surprises, so to speak, right? Things that happen unexpectedly that make people rethink a candidate. And there's this huge block of voters that's swayable either way, and everybody agrees on what the facts are. So let's see if it does. I just tend to think it won't. And, the former president has said things over the years, sorry about the shaking there, that, Democrats will tell me, how can this not have an impact on the race? And I will kind of give them the same answer.
Plagiarism is a big deal, though. And while she may make misstatements and he may make misstatements, that's a knowledge of forethought. That's willful and intentional. It's sort of the reason plagiarism loses people tenured college professorships is because it's a combination of theft, lying, and fraud. But we'll leave that as it is. We won't know. I just was looking for your opinion. Now, let's turn to the story in I believe it's the Washington Post this morning. She's desperate for black votes. Harris steps up. No, it's the New York Times. Harris steps up major push for black voters. It's 3 weeks to the election, David. Does this surprise you?
Well, no, it doesn't necessarily surprise me. First of all, she wasn't the nominee until late July, right? So everything she's been doing has been on a sort of delayed schedule. Number two, and this goes back to when Joe Biden was still in the race for re-election, Donald Trump has been doing much better, according to all of the polls, with black men, Hispanic men, let alone white men, let alone younger white men. And so she's still winning with black men, but she's not winning with the margins that previous Democratic nominees had, including Biden in 2020. And so she's looking for a way to get over the top. And the way you do that is you go to constituencies that have supported you in greater numbers before, and you try and get your numbers back up to those levels. And that it's just not any more complicated than that.
David, let me talk to you about Dwayne and I spent some time on the air check yesterday, and I'm sure he did it on Dwayne's World as well. The difference between Trump's polling this year and in 2020 and in 2016, he's much stronger. Do you think that, and I mean across every demographic in the swing states, he's ahead in every state except Wisconsin, where he's down by 0.3%, which is statistically meaningless. He's closer to 50% than he's ever been. Have the models gotten better, or has Trump gotten stronger?
Well, I think we'll find out. It could be a combination of both. I wrote about this, Hugh, in August for our Dispatch Politics newsletter. Trump's polling the best he's ever polled in any of his three campaigns. His favorables are higher than they've ever been. His horse race numbers are better than they've ever been. His numbers with non-white voters are better than they've ever been. So he's a much stronger candidate than he was in 2016 and 2020, at least according to the numbers. Look, in talking to Democrats and pollsters, of course, they've had the experience of polling Trump for quite some time, and they think that they've adjusted their models. And look, I've talked to Republicans too. They don't want to undercount Trump because it impacts strategic decisions they'll make for their down ballot candidates that they are advising. But as we saw, so what I'm saying is, you're right to point that out. It is an actual thing. It's something that I have covered and written about. And Democrats are aware of it, right? So when I talk to Democrats, this isn't just something they say publicly. They know that they're dealing with a Trump that is more difficult to beat compared to whatever they thought of their ability to beat him in 2016 and 2020. Of course, one goes one way, one goes the other. And so as an analyst, I'm just trying to figure out what all of that means, other than it's very obvious Trump could win and he's in a great position. We also had 2022, which surprised a lot of people in how independent voters broke at the end. Now we're dealing with a presidential versus a midterm election, but turnout was high 2 years ago. So again, just like I said before, it's not much more complicated than that. Trump's in a great position to win. I think that's why you see Kamala Harris doing different things to try to get over the top. She's not relying on national horse race numbers, which are tight anyway. She's not acting as though the tie is going to go to the runner, assuming she's the runner. She's acting like the tie is going to go to the runner and he's the runner. And so we'll see how this shakes out.
The House and the Senate. Let's begin with the latter. I think we've got, obviously, Governor Justice going to be Senator Justice, and it looks like Tim Sheehy is 7 or 8 points ahead outside of the margin of error. What's the next most likely Republican pickup, David Dreyer?
Really good question, Hugh. Republicans are still eyeing Ohio, obviously. Sherrod Brown trying to hold off Bernie Moreno. Of those, red states represented by Democratic senators, Brown is giving the Republicans the toughest fight. But Republicans think Moreno can still get there. But I think if there's any Democrat that's going to survive at this point, it's Sherrod Brown is the sense. The Wisconsin race with Eric Hovde challenging Tammy Baldwin, the incumbent Democrat, that's much tighter than Republicans presumed it would be, and they're giving Hovde a chance to win. And so keep an eye on that one. Where Republicans, at least privately, or at least put it this way, my Republican sources in Nevada do not think Sam Brown can win, even though they think that Donald Trump has a very good chance to win. And then I would say that Republicans, and I'm mentioning this because, Democrats will, who knows, maybe they'll want to spin when things are in their favor or things are tough. When I talk to Republicans about Arizona, they don't think that one is happening for them. Kerry Lake taking on Ruben Gallego, and they tend to think that the polling, again, showing Trump in a position to win, but Ruben Gallego, the Democrat, in a position to win, they tend to buy that. But
what's interesting, David, you didn't mention my number one race. I want to play for you. Kamala Harris in Erie, Pennsylvania yesterday, cut number 12.
Bob Casey, who could not be here tonight because he's out doing what he needs to do to get reelected to the United States Senate.
So Bob Casey wouldn't show up for Kamala Harris. I think Dave McCormick is beating him.
Well, the Republicans that I've spoken to in recent days think he's caught him, but don't necessarily think he's there yet. But they feel very confident that McCormick is in a position to win. So I would just I didn't leave that out on purpose. It's just hard for me to keep track of all of these races. But McCormick's running a very good race. You know, one of the best Republican pollsters I know, Wes Anderson, produced a poll, which is now public, for Sentinel Action Fund, which is going door to door for Dave McCormick. I joined them at the doors in suburban Philly on Friday, and they had that thing as, I believe, 47-46, Casey over McCormick. And so McCormick's in a good place. I still think they believe he needs to move a little bit higher to get over the top, but definitely right to remind everybody about that race.
So, David, give us a little more detail on that. If you have any time, if you're pushed for time, I'll let you go because this is overtime with you. What do you mean you went door to door with them? Is that how they're polling? They're actually trying to find real live human beings?
No, this is a ground game. So as you know, the Republican National Committee, at the direction of Donald Trump, decided to jettison its traditional ground game, which I've written a lot about this, Hugh. It's been a very effective ground game. Trump decided to go a different direction. And so a whole collection of outside groups are going door to door trying to turn out the vote for Republicans with varying success and effectiveness. Sentinel Action Fund happens to be one of the groups that actually knows what it's doing and has been on the ground for quite some time. They're targeting low propensity voters in Philly. And so I was with them at a sort of middle class to lower middle class suburb in Bucks County, Levittown, a former Democratic stronghold. And with political realignment, this sort of an area now is more prone to elect Republicans, whereas the upscale suburbs in Bucks, where I started on Friday, more prone to elect Democrats. And just went door to door with them. They're trying to make sure people turn in their mail-in ballots. They're encouraging people to vote by mail. It's the sort of thing where you don't hit every door. You hit targeted doors where data says there's a registered Republican there who has a ballot or may have a ballot or want a ballot. And they're focused on McCormick. They're also focused on a few other Senate races, but in Philly, it's obviously Dave McCormick. In Pennsylvania, it's obviously Dave McCormick. And so look, Dave McCormick's super PAC is also going door to door. Sentinel Action Fund's going door to door for him, and they're trying to reverse that trend of Republicans being afraid to vote by mail or vote early in other methods, so you can bank the vote and focus then on everybody else. So that's what I saw.
Very last question, David. I want to get one more in. I have Austin Thuralt coming in. He's in Maine's 2nd Congressional District. I live literally on the line between the 1st and the 2nd District. The 1st District is deep blue. The 2nd District is deep red. Like all the conservatives live north of Brunswick.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I think Austin Thuralt's going to win. I've talked to local Maine people in the Maine Wire. They feel like he's a good young candidate. Jared Golden has been voting one way, talking another way. That's just one of many races that there are coin flips. You know, I'm praying Juan Ciscomani holds on to his seat in Tucson. He could be adversely affected by Gallegos. He might be helped by Gallegos. I don't know. What do you think about the overall majority in the House right now?
Yeah, by the way, that Maine 2nd District, I traveled with Jared Golden in 2018 when he flipped that seat for Democrats. So it's one that if they're going to win the seats that are going to help them expand their majority, the Republicans, that's one that you want to get in a presidential cycle where Trump's going to win that district by 8 to 10 points. Look, I think, you know, Democrats and Republicans I talk to are sort of split on the House majority, and do they win it and by how much? Do they hold it and by how much? Republicans are definitely in a good position to expand the majority, but you know there are signs that Democrats, just given that it's a 4-seat majority, they're defending that Democrats feel like they might be able to get there. I'd remind everybody, Hugh, you won't forget this, that in 2020, Joe Biden beats Donald Trump and Republicans gained 14 House seats. Now, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in that race for Republicans to grab after the 2018 midterms that doesn't exist this time. But I don't have a sense exactly of who's in a better position here, but Republicans are certainly in a position to hold. And then can they expand? Let's see by how much. And Democrats are not out of it, but can they get over the top if they're losing some seats like Golden's in Maine? If that's what happens, it definitely makes it tougher for them.
And, you know, that's why Donald Trump was in California, Coachella. That's Ken Calvert's district. And Ken Calvert's a great congressman. He's going to be chair of appropriations someday. And I think they were just making that point. I can't tell, but I will say this. Literally a minute, David. I think 2022 was thrown off by Dobbs, and that the Dobbs effect is no longer as present because it's on the ballot. It's obviously not been outlawed. Dobbs was a stunner to people, but abortion remains widely available, as does the abortion chemical pill. I don't think the Dobbs effect is going to be as great this time, though Kamala Harris always talks about it. 30 seconds. Does the Dobbs effect wear off in some of these congressional districts?
It could. I'm not convinced it will, but it could. I thought the Dobbs effect was stronger in 2022 than I expected because it's this election where Supreme Court justice appointments are really on the ballot. So we're going to have to see.
David Drucker, always a pleasure talking to you. David M. Drucker of the Dispatch. Follow him, read him, always get his morning notes when he sends them. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I spoke to David Drucker during the break, and I put that over at YouTube along with the first part of the interview. It is my habit now to take people into the commercial, news, traffic, weather, sports, and commercial break on radio and on the Salem News Channel. Then I make it available to you on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, it's free. You just go subscribe to Hugh Hewitt. I only put up interviews there and monologues. Like I'm gonna have Harley do 3 monologues today. I normally do 1. This is a monologue that is immediate. It just occurred to me. So it's not prepped. It's just I'm looking at the cut sheet Dwayne gave me, and I realize I don't think there's ever been a worse vice presidential candidate than Tim Walz. And I'm trying to remember. Jack Kemp disappointed us in his debate with Walter Mondale in the 1996 vice presidential debate. Right? That was a disappointment. But he was still a pretty good candidate. And Dan Quayle wasn't great, but he wasn't bad, and people got to like him and eventually realized that he was a very smart guy. The opposite is happening with Tim Walz, but for purposes of contrasting, nobody votes for vice president, but if you're the one person who worries about that, here's J.D. Vance yesterday doing a press conference outside of the Minneapolis, Minnesota police precinct that Tim Walz allowed to burn down during the 2020 riots after the murder of George Floyd, cut number 20.
First, I just want to say a little bit about what this building behind us represents. So you can see it's all boarded up. This is, of course, the headquarters of the 3rd Precinct, which was burned down. Burned out, I should say, thanks to Tim Walz's completely failed leadership. And, talking to these folks behind me, I mean, these are law enforcement officers. A lot of them were here, some of them for many days when this was allowed to happen. And remember, during those riots, these guys were given up for dead. Their police chief told them to stand down, hoping that it would save their lives. A couple of them just told me just now their fear that they would be killed by the violent mob that was attacking this precinct. And the important question is, what were their leaders, in particular, what was Governor Tim Walz doing to keep these officers safe and to bring order to the city of Minneapolis? The answer was absolutely nothing. They described being left for dead by the person who wants to be the vice president of the United States. And to all the folks who are watching this, I think the message is very simple. That do we want a kind of leader who stands with the law enforcement, who fights for them, who protects their lives as they go about keeping us safe? Or do we want someone who encourages rioters and looters to burn down this precinct, who leaves the officers for dead, and then a president who then bails out some of those same rioters and looters out of prison? I think we want the law and order president. We want somebody who stands with our law enforcement, and most importantly, who stands with the communities that depend on law enforcement, and that means we want Donald J. Trump as president.
So J.D. Vance is not speaking with a teleprompter. Yale Law School teaches you a few things. So does the Marine Corps. So does The Ohio State University. Obviously doesn't teach you how to beat the Ducks yet. We'll beat the Ducks later. But J.D. Vance, very good. In fact, J.D. Vance knows there's a news cycle unfolding about the plagiarism scandal engulfing Kamala Harris. So he comments on it. Cut number 19.
I saw today, actually, a story that Kamala Harris apparently copied some significant chunks of her book from Wikipedia. So if you want a president with their own ideas, vote for Donald Trump. If you want a president who copies her own ideas from Wikipedia, vote for Kamala Harris.
All right, so this is just effortless on his part. He's effortless. He's a learning machine. He's very good at this. Compare and contrast with Tim Walz, It was once said about Harold Carswell, an unfortunate nominee for the Supreme Court by Richard Nixon, that mediocre people need representation too. I don't want to quote that in the context of Tim Walz, as it would be unfair to mediocre people. Here he is in Green Bay yesterday, cut number 13.
Donald Trump over the weekend was talking about using the U.S. Army against people who disagree with him. Just so you're clear about that, that's you. That's what he's talking about. This is not some mythical thing out there. He called it the enemy within. And to Donald Trump, anybody who doesn't agree with him is the enemy. I tell you that not to make you fearful or anything. I tell you that because we need to whip his butt and put this guy behind us.
I really have no idea what he's talking about. Donald Trump at Coachella may have criticized Mark Milley. I like Mark Milley, but Trump doesn't. And I don't know what he's talking about, but it's ridiculous. He has another ridiculous claim, but it's kind of a blowback on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, cut number 14.
Look, you all know it. We can't have 4 more years of this. We won't have 4 more years of it. We won't.
4 more years of this is what we've been having. Biden-Harris. Inflation, 10 million migrants, lower defense spending, not standing by our ally Israel. She will be the most anti-Israel president in history. Now, she does go to church. I have a new Fox News column out this morning on Kamala's church-going day. I would love to know, Brett is not going to waste the question on this. How many times did you go to church in the last year? I would really like to know that. Now, it's very hard on congregations when presidents go to church, but W did it, and HW did it, and I did it all the time. Maybe it's harder now, but I just have never known. I thought Kamala Harris was a secular humanist. Who knew? Well, Tim Walz also did a local television interview with WGAL, Channel 8, the NBC affiliate in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Let's begin with cut number 15.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection say there were 10 million illegal crossings in the first years of the Biden administration. Was it a mistake to overturn former President Trump's border policies and talk negatively toward the wall?
Well, the first day in office, President Biden and Vice President Harris put a proposal forward. And what we know is that crossings are down now than when Donald Trump left office. We also know that there is a solution to this. It's a bipartisan bill.
Number one, it's a lie that they proposed that bill on the first day in office. It was proposed and negotiated in 2024 between Jim Lankford, a fine Oklahoma senator, who was told by the Republican conference, get the best deal that you can. He did. It wasn't even remotely close enough. It was an amnesty bill, and it did not have the wall, so the conference rejected it. It was not proposed on day one. That was a lie. Tim Walz, cut number 16.
Voters are worried about the economy, prices at the grocery store, the gas pumps. They've risen under the Biden-Harris administration. What would you do differently if elected?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, we're seeing inflation start to cool some. We're seeing proposals put forward, whether it's price gouging. Look, Donald Trump's disastrous handling of COVID left a bit of a mess, but we're focusing on that.
Okay, so she doesn't. Barbara Barr, by the way, is asking great questions. They're under 30 seconds. They're very direct. What would you do different? He has no answer. He said, oh, Donald Trump left us a mess under COVID. No, he didn't. He left you a vaccine. Honest to goodness, these people. Cut number 17, Barbara Barr. Remember, this is Barbara Barr, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania needs fracking. Cut number 17.
Fracking, a very important industry, natural gas here in Pennsylvania. 4 years ago, candidate Harris was going to ban fracking. She has now changed her position. Do you think the voters are going to buy that she has changed her mind in 4 years? And how important is this industry to Pennsylvania and America?
Yeah, well, 4 years ago she said it, and 4 weeks ago she said it, and it is important. I think what people are going to recognize is America's producing more natural gas and more oil than at any time in our history, but we're also producing more clean energy jobs that gives Pennsylvania a bridge to the future. Look, that's simply the fact on this. Donald Trump wants to make somewhat of an issue. The vice president's been very clear.
No, she has not been very clear. She is against fracking. It's in her bones. It's in her bones. People don't believe her. She's a plagiarist. One more. By the way, Barbara Barr gets an Emmy for this. It's succinct, it's concise, it's on point. Cut number 18.
We're focused on bringing prices down, focusing on the things middle-class families care about, and then focusing on tackling the big issues like Medicare and stay-at-home care for seniors. Those are really innovative ideas.
Yet polls show that many Americans and Pennsylvanians think the economy was better over the Trump administration, and they liked his tax cuts. They helped everyone.
Well, the fact of the matter is that he left with 10 million people out of work, 9 million jobs closed, and we were in the middle of the global pandemic. I don't think people want to go back to tens of thousands of Americans dying.
Is he actually incapable of responding to a question? He is the worst vice presidential nominee. It's obscured by the fact that Kamala Harris is the most radical, least prepared, and vacuous presidential nominee of modern times. We can't say that going back because we don't have records of whether or not candidates from the 19th century were empty gaseous balloons floating around. But none of them came out of the San Francisco, Berkeley, Montreal era of Kamala Harris. I just think, just compare. Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance as a bridge to the future. Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz because they needed the Elmer Fudd vote. I want to quote David Urban from CNN this weekend. They wanted the Elmer Fudd vote. That might be the Dwayne vote. I don't know. Dwayne's World can cover that today. I want to remind everyone, Dwayne's got a podcast, Dwayne's World. I've got a podcast, Highly Concentrated View. I've got a YouTube channel as well. Their headquarters are in Florida. They are rushing supplies, very basic things, hygiene kits, tents, stuff like that, to North Carolina, to Tennessee, and especially Florida, where their headquarters are. The relief supplies banner can be found at HughHewitt.com. Any amount helps. The interesting thing is hundreds of thousands of people are out of power and out of luck and in terrible straits in Florida, but they can get relief to them. Tens of thousands of people are in terrible situation, out of power in North Carolina and Tennessee, maybe remote Georgia, maybe remote southwestern Virginia. It's very hard to get relief to them. Food for the Poor is taking care of everyone. You can also call in a donation at 855-359-4673, 855-359-4673. And if you're the people who like to get a text message sent to you, text my name, Hewitt, Hewitt, to 51555, and Food for the Poor will send you a very secure link. Also want to tell you about the Battleground Talkers Tour. Going to a couple of places. Check battlegroundtour.com to find out where that is. Battlegroundtour.com to find out where that is. And I don't promise you it'll be exciting because I'm out there with Gallagher, and I got to do a lot of work when I'm with Gallagher. A lot of work when I'm with Gallagher. But I'm always happy to be out with him, but it just, my back hurts at the end. Can I go back to Glenn Youngkin with Jake Tapper yesterday? Because Governor Youngkin is my governor. I'm a Virginian. Proud to have voted for him, proud to have endorsed him. Glad that I hope he runs for Senate in a couple of years if he doesn't run for president. Yesterday, he just took out after the Department of Justice coming after Virginia election integrity laws, cut number 1 with Jake Tapper.
Why not just honor that 90-day period?
Well, let me just first begin. It's anything but a purging program. It begins with someone identifying themselves as a non-citizen. And I guess I would posit back to you, do you think that non-citizens, when they've self-identified as a non-citizen, should stay on the voter roll and therefore be in a position to potentially vote in a presidential election?
I don't think any non-citizen should vote. How are they self-identifying? How does that happen?
They actually tick a box that says, I am a non-citizen, or they do not answer the question that they are a citizen, and therefore they self-identify that they are not a citizen in the United States of America. And this is why this is so out of bounds in my mind from the Justice Department. They fully understand this. They understand the process starts with a person self-identifying as a non-citizen, and then there is a match with that person's name on the voter rolls, and they are given not just one, but up to 3 times in order to try to cure it. And this is why I find this to be a very, very unreal moment that is stunning, that they filed this suit 25 days before a presidential election, when in fact this has been going on in accordance with our Constitution, the federal Constitution, and state law since 2006.
I'm a PG-13 conservative, so I say Sappho. Screw around and find out. Other people use other words, but they screwed around. And DOJ came after the Virginia voter integrity law, which says people who are not citizens can't vote. And let's go to cut number 2, Glenn Youngkin with Sean Hannity last night.
That bill was signed in 2006, and it requires us to use DMV data where people self-identify as non-citizens to then go through a process of removing them from the voter rolls if they're on the voter rolls. And guess what? That's exactly what we've been doing. It's been happening for 18 years. Democrat governors, even Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam, used this process all the way up through into October. And that's exactly what we're doing in Virginia today is someone walks into the DMV, they identify themselves as a non-citizen, somehow or another, either by accident or by purpose, they register to vote. They're on the voter roll. We go through a process of notifying the registrar that they need to be told that if they cannot affirm their citizenship in 14 days, they're taken off the voter roll. And this is the process that the Department of Justice, 25 days before a presidential election, turns around and says, you must stop doing this. And that is unbelievable to me. I mean, here I am.
Because the DOJ is thoroughly weaponized by Biden and Harris, and it will get worse if we let them say that Justice Department has got to be cleaned out top to bottom. The restless wave. Admiral, we had my brother-in-law, Naval Academy class of 67, over, along with our main gang, and the main gang heard George and I talking about the restless wave, and they wanted it, but I got to get it back before I leave, because I've read half of it. The Fetching Mrs. Hewitt has read 3/4 of it, and George has it, and everybody loves it. And now there's a little bit of a family angle here, because George and my wife's grandfather and uncle are in the book in minor roles. But I'm telling you, this is a fabulous read. Everybody wants it. How's the response going?
It's going extremely well. We're on a bunch of the Amazon bestseller lists for top historical fiction, top political fiction. Fingers crossed over the next couple of weeks, we'll break into that New York Times bestseller list where 2034 landed. And I'm feeling good, Hugh. I'm feeling so good. I may send you a couple more copies of the book. I'll pay for them. And you can share them around with your Maine gang. How's that?
Don't do that, because I'm leaving Maine in 4 days. But I will eventually get them from you, and I'll send them to the Maine gang. Admiral, I'm going to talk to you about one part that's early in the book, and it's because of the allegations of plagiarism about the vice president. And I want to say, you don't do politics. You're the chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation. You're the vice chair of Carlyle. You don't do politics. I don't want you to do politics. I want you to talk about the honor code at Annapolis and about the very real dilemma. Because honestly, when I read the book and I was considering what they would do, I had no idea what they would do, because cheating scandals are not unknown at the United States Naval Academy. This was very well developed. Did that have a historical precedent, or did you invent that?
That had a historical precedent from my own class of 1976. And this was a cheating scandal. Oh, yeah. This was a cheating scandal that involved the leak of the test in navigation. And it ran like wildfire through the class of 76. And many of my classmates succumbed to the temptation to take a look at it, and therefore went into the test with pre-advanced knowledge. And that resulted in an enormous investigation, the potential of kicking out hundreds of midshipmen. This quite significant event mirrored at West Point, mirrored at Air Force Academy. It's something that happens every decade or so. It's very unfortunate, and it's a clear violation of the very simple honor code of all three of the services academies, which is a midshipman will not lie, cheat, or steal.
So let me go to the most recent Annapolis scandal, which involved, I think, 10 graduates of a recent class who elected and were selected by the Marine Corps to go to the Quantico basic course, which involves navigation with a compass, which is kind of crazy given what we have today, but you might have to use it. And they cheated. And they all got thrown out. Now, they had graduated from the Naval Academy. There's an enormous investment in them. And the Marine Corps threw them all out. Why would they do that, Admiral, as opposed to like suspending them for a year or something?
I think it probably was, in fact, a tough call for the Marines. You know, in the end, you want to give people second chances. You want people to learn from their mistakes. One of the fundamental lessons of the novel, The Restless Wave, in fact, is that as the novel goes along, the two principal characters are learning and developing and facing up to their flaws. Having said that, in terms of core value like that, and particularly for the U.S. Marine Corps, which I think stands atop all the other services in their focus on morality and ethics, they don't want to tolerate people who lie, people who cheat.
Okay.
people
Admiral,
who
I want to ask you a
steal.
straight up question. This is not a trap question. I'm not talking to you about Vice President Harris. I'm just asking, is plagiarism a Bilgegate offense at the Naval Academy?
You'd have to ask the current superintendent about that. I would say that if it is cheating, which is normally obtaining answers early on a test, copying someone else's work, plagiarism would edge into that. But each case is adjudicated individually. And by the way, each case at the service academies is adjudicated by the midshipmen themselves. They then render.
Now, I want to turn to a second part of the book. My grandfather-in-law makes a brief appearance at the Army-Navy Club, and I love the Army-Navy Club. If Jerry Hendricks or Mark are listening, they know I love the Army-Navy Club, but I'm a civilian. I only go there by invitation. And then they get advice by the then Admiral Tossig about where to go and not go in Hawaii. And of course, the young officers promptly go where they're not supposed to go. They go to an enlisted man's bar. So I asked George, why do we have enlisted men bars and NCO bars and officers bars? And he said, that's actually for the benefit of the troops. They don't want to be around the senior chiefs. They don't want to be around even the ensigns. They want to be around everybody. Is that true? Is that your view of it?
I think that is the 1940s view of things. And I think it perpetuates today. Chief petty officers love to be at a chief petty officers club. I think sailors these days don't spend a heck of a lot of time in sailor bars. I think all of that is kind of historical fiction, but the echoes of that are something that carries through the novel, through The Restless Wave. And the scene you're referring to in the Army-Navy Club, getting the advice from the old line admiral, and then promptly going 180 out and headed down to the tackiest sailor bar on the Strip in Pearl Harbor. Yeah, that's all true. And I think a lot of those echoes come through in today's world. You know, part of the reason I wrote The Restless Wave was a quote from Churchill, which is, the further into the future you want to look, the more you have to look to the past. We learn a lot from these echoes in the past.
Now let's look into the future with Admiral Rickover in mind. Today, Google announced that they have ordered small modular nuclear reactors for its data centers. And this is from it's a startup firm called Kairos. I wish I was an investor in Kairos, but I'm not. So we can talk about this and tell us if you have a conflict. I just think this is great. It is the moment we've been waiting for, and we have Hyman Rickover to thank for proving that you can miniaturize a nuclear reactor, I think. Am I correct?
100% correct. Not only miniaturize them, but run them with essentially a perfect safety record over decades and decades and decades. That's what Rickover brought to the Navy.
On Thursday, I'm going to have Dan Poneman, former President Obama's Deputy Secretary of Energy, on to talk about how we have to embrace nuclear power if we're going to keep up with AI and supercomputer needs. Is that your resting face belief as well, Admiral?
100%. And I'll just add a little addition to that, and you should ask him about this. How much longer before we get to fusion reactors, which are cleaner, have a longer use case, are in many ways safer than the fission reactors we use now. There is enormous change coming in nuclear power, and he is my view, it is 100% correct to say that we have to turn that dial and have more nuclear reactors. We only have a handful here in the United States, yet the U.S. Navy has shown decade after decade you can not only miniaturize them, not only operate them safely, you can put them on moving platforms going 40 miles an hour and drive them to the bottom of the sea, 1,000 feet or more beneath the surface. If we can do that with a nuclear reactor and operate it safely, we can certainly do that ashore. It solves an awful lot of the carbon problems that we face.
Now, Admiral, my last question goes to the selection process at the Academy. You're a protagonist, and this is the first of 3 novels, right?
Yes.
All right. I'm looking forward to this. Is going to be like Winds of War, but with a bonus. And I hope someone in Hollywood is listening and options this already. The big get was to be a battleship guy at the Annapolis class of 41. You wanted to be on a battleship. Turned out in about 10 minutes that battleships at Pearl Harbor were not really what you wanted to be. You wanted to be on a carrier or a submarine. What's the big get at the Academy now?
The big get at the Academy in surface warfare, which is what we're talking about in my wheelhouse, is to be on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer like the USS Barry, which I commanded. They're multi-domain, meaning they shoot missiles, they shoot tomahawks, land attack. They are quite effective against submarines. They do command and control. Crew of about 350. These are marvelous machines of war. And I think they are not the battleships of today, in that their relevance is going to continue on for another couple of decades. In the world of aviation, I think you know some folks pretty well who fly fast attack fighters. I'd love to, if I were an aviator, be on one of those F-35s or even a F/A-18 Hornet Advanced series. And the nuclear submarines, I'll close with this, Hugh, those are the apex predators of the ocean. I would take.
Well, I get in trouble because I tell my family that's involved in naval aviation that their day is setting. They're like the battleships of old. It's all going to be under the water, or F-22s from ground bases far away. Admiral, let me close by asking you this. If you were the king of the forest, not queen, not duke, not earl, got put in charge of the Pentagon by either President Harris or President Trump, could you get the Arleigh Burke production lines up? There are only 3 of them in the Kennebec River. There are only 3. They're like the most valuable asset we've got in the Middle East right now.
I'd go back to what we learned from The Restless Wave, from the novel about World War II. And the short answer is yes, this nation is capable of increasing production unbelievably if we have to, if there's leadership and there is need. I would argue there is certainly need. We need the leadership to drive that forward.
Admiral James Stavridis, congratulations. I will have read the entirety of The Restless Wave by the time we talk next week, because I get it back and I'm reading it on the drive from Maine back to the Beltway this weekend. So thank you in advance for it. Here's cut 21, Boris Sanchez at CNN. Now, let me preface it by saying I don't know Boris. I think he does a fine job as an anchor. He's a news reader. He went to Syracuse, good journalism school. He worked in Miami. He's a good presence on TV. I do not have an opinion about his politics. I've never met him. Here's cut 21.
It's fair to say that analysts have pointed out that progress that was made with the Abraham Accords and the potential for Israel to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia is ultimately what led to Hamas's attack. Nevertheless, sir, I do have one more question for you.
Still think he doesn't have an opinion?
I just have to say I need to hear it again, because that's what you said it said, and I couldn't believe he would say that. Let's play cut 21 again.
It's fair to say that analysts have pointed out that progress that was made with the Abraham Accords and the potential for Israel to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia is ultimately what led to Hamas's attack. Nevertheless, sir, I do have one more question for you.
Did Vivek say anything in response that you cut out?
No, I don't know. I just grabbed the question because the question to me was just it's Trump's fault that we had October 7th. it's Pompeo's fault. It's just absurd.
I don't know of any analyst who says Hamas,
not one.
which existed long before. I want people to know Hamas's charter predates the Abraham Accords. Hamas took over Gaza in 2006. The Abraham Accords was a breakthrough for peace between Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Morocco, and eventually Saudi Arabia, that in no way led Hamas to be anything different than Hamas has always been. They've been plotting this, planning this, building the tunnels for 15 years. I really have no idea where that comes from.
It comes from we hate Trump. Everything is Trump's fault. We've got to find a way to make everything Trump's fault. So again, still think that you can't maybe glean a little insight as to where Boris stands?
The Abraham Accord. I don't know if someone told them. Look, my assumption is there are news readers. That's what they call them in the United Kingdom. There are people who just read what they're told. I don't know if Boris has an independent intellectual curiosity or knowledge base. He was a White House correspondent. But, you know, I know Ambassador Otaiba, who is the ambassador from the UAE. I know Jared Kushner. We've talked about the Abraham Accords on the show. I've interviewed Ambassador Friedman. I've talked to Donald Trump about it. Robert O'Brien's one of my closest friends. Mike Pompeo is a very dear friend. The Abraham Accords had nothing to do with Hamas. They did not prompt Hamas. Hamas charter dates back decades, and it is committed to the destruction of Israel. I cannot believe he said
Freeing
that.
up money to Iran is what helped lead to 10/7.
I just can't believe he said that. Play it one more time, please.
It's fair to say that analysts have pointed out that progress that was made with the Abraham Accords and the potential for Israel to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia is ultimately what led to Hamas's
So what
attack.
I want people to know wait. There may be one or two people out there, like John Mersheimer, who have said the Abraham Accords prompted Hamas to act in order to preempt an expansion of the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia. That would be an erroneous understanding of history, and it would be placing way too much credibility. And the journalistic malpractice here is not putting that proposition to Vivek, who would have lacerated, but saying it as a sideswipe on the way out. Are you covering that on Dwayne's World today?
No. Because one, you covered it. By the time I tape my podcast this afternoon, there's going to be a whole different news cycle. Now, on the issue I'm going to tape today, I'm actually going to be talking to John Ashbrook. I'm grabbing one of the four horsemen of the
Oh my goodness, you're doing Ruthless podcasting?
I'm doing one of the four horsemen of the Ruthless podcast.
You might mention to him that I have the merch and you don't.
I'm trying to work on merch.
I've got the friend of the program right here. I have the merch.
Fine.
I told people last night or 2 nights ago at dinner, I told Two Speed Tony, also known as Tony Commercial Real Estate, and Mark the Digger, and their wonderful spouses, that the best conservative podcast on politics is Ruthless, because the guys know what they're doing. The fellas know their stuff.
I have known and talked to John Ashbrook since 2005.
I will be listening to Dwayne's World.
And the fun thing about it is
I got to go to my Relief Factor, The Clock, Dwayne, The Clock. ReliefFactor.com is a sponsor of our show. The sponsor of our show. Poor Dwayne just doesn't understand clocks. Hugh Hewitt here with Brett Baer, who gets the scoop of the year. He gets to sit down with Kamala Harris tomorrow night. You'll see it live to tape on Special Report at 6. I believe he gets to tape between 5:30 and 6. Am I right about that, Brett?
Hey, Hugh, good morning. 5 and 5:30, it's a quick turnaround. So I started out by saying we plan to run it, uninterrupted, but I had to check with the business people to make sure that we didn't have any commercials in there and that we didn't have to cut it in half or something. But for everybody who's been asking, it is as live. In other words, we roll the tape, but it's running just as we do it. So from beginning to end, you'll see every second, and it will be unedited, and we will run it without commercial straight through the first half hour of my show.
So I got asked yesterday, do you think Brett feels the pressure? I said, Brett's a Pentagon guy. He made a dozen trips or more to Iraq and as many almost to Afghanistan. This is nothing compared to being in a war zone, but nevertheless, talk us through your preparation.
Yeah. No, it's nothing like being in a war zone, but there is incoming.
Oh,
a different kind. But listen, my preparation is what people care about. What do people care about in this election? What have we not heard from Vice President Harris? And most importantly, my style. If you look back at the sit down I had with former President Trump one-on-one, the last one was actually June, and it is to listen, as you do very well, to the answer, to be able to follow up, to be able to illuminate something that maybe the candidate hasn't done in talking points. And I think that, I credited Bill Whitaker of CBS for his approach. I think that the editing and the whole thing about that was egregious. But I liked how he was doing some of that. And I expect to have the same kind of tone and tenor as that.
Brett, I have absolutely no idea what your politics are, and I think that's great. I'm a center-right guy, and I'm a Republican, and everyone knows that. But I got to say, they didn't give you much notice. Donald Trump let me know he was going to come on 10/7 a week before, and I didn't announce it because stuff happened. I had a week to get ready and 72 hours to outline and then re-outline. And I don't have the number of people on top of me that you do. I'm just basically doing what I want to do, as you will be able to do what you want to do. But I'm sure everybody has an idea. I have no suggestions for you, Brett, because I always hate it when people tell me what to ask, given I've been doing this since 1990 and you've been doing just about as long. Nevertheless, how many people are coming in with what year?
There'll be a couple of questions that fit the Hugh Hewitt model. You'll approve of a couple of them. I know.
Okay, but how many people at Fox try and line up the putt for you?
You know what? It's amazing. It hasn't happened. It really hasn't happened. And there's like this walled off, let you do your own thing. After 27 years of being here, it's one of the benefits. Everybody has their own kind of thing going. The only thing I've gotten is go get them, and you're going to be great, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, on social media, it's a different environment, which is, some people are convinced it's just going to be this rollover. Other people say it's just not going to be fair. So if we can get tough but fair in the middle there, I think it's going to be good.
Brett, I often provide question lists when our friends on the left are doing political interviews because they sometimes don't think. But you actually you do the both sides segment. You know what Democrats think. You know what Republicans think. I think it'll be easy for you to come up with it. But how do you do it? I start with just a long list, and then I start outlining the outline. How do you do it?
Yeah, I do exactly that. I think what's important, I think about flow. I do sort of like, I'm not a lawyer, but a murder board for a deposition, I suppose, like where this person may go and where that may lead. So there's multiple routes that you take with questions and follow-ups. Listen, I think the goal of it, at the end of it, is to say, one, tough but fair, but two, that you learned something or it illuminated something that you hadn't seen in this campaign. With 3 weeks to the day, to Election Day, with an election this tight, I mean, there's just a lot of interest in this election if you look at it across the board. So I think that the interview comes at a big time.
I am hoping, and maybe you can break a little news here, has former President Trump requested 30 minutes with you prior to the show that would air live to tape?
He hasn't, but we're putting. We have the request out, and I hope that he'll take it up. And I kind of feel like he might. Not doing a debate, but doing a sit down like this, live to tape or live, either one. By the way, I asked for live with the Harris campaign. Their timing just happened to work that it was after this event that they have, and that's the hold that they gave us. But it's essentially what we're doing is live.
Well, I'm hoping he immediately says yes, because what I see happening here is nudging aside our friends at CBS, and I know you have many friends there, and I do too, but I think 60 Minutes has run its course, and the back-to-back presidential interview slot is open. And since the vice president is doing it with you, if the former president comes along and does a half hour with you, we have a new model and a place that I think most people consider to be fair, balanced, and unafraid. Last question, Brett. Will you call up Britt before you do this?
Yeah, he's a great mentor and friend, and has just decades and decades of experience. And I'm not going to go over every question and everything like that, but I'll ask for his thoughts and advice. I always have, and I always will.
It's like a former president calling. It's like a current president calling up a former president. If you're a former anchor, you should get calls from your current anchors because it's a good idea to do that. Brett, good luck. We'll be watching tomorrow night at 6. The interview tapes from 5 to 5:30 airs unedited. They're really not going to interrupt it for a commercial break?
0 commercials for a half hour.
That's extraordinary, actually. That costs Fox News a lot of money. So I'm here to tell you that's something that you don't see very much. Good luck, Brett. You'll have a great time. I'm sure it'll be fun. We'll talk about it next week, I'm sure.
You got it.
Be well. I got to say, Donald Trump, if you're listening, call them up right now and say I'm in. And then in one election cycle, we will have disemboweled the Presidential Debate Commission and 60 Minutes tradition because they're both old, out of sync, not trusted. Time to turn to the new trusted person. Now, Brett's very trusted, and I assume that someone will come up in the ranks that Brett can hand the baton to because Fox has built Special Report into fair, balanced, and unafraid. They cover everything. They cover it with a neutral personality. Their panel is usually split 2 center right, 1 center left. They do not. Sometimes it's 2 center right and a journalist who doesn't have professed opinions, but about whom many people have suspicions. But often I'm on with Leslie Marshall, an old friend of mine. She's a lefty, far more to the left than I am to the right, and a third person. But they get good, articulate liberals on there, and that's all you want for the panel section. That's why the panel is the panel. Not small t, not small p, but capital T, capital P, the panel. And that's why Kamala Harris is making a very shrewd move. That having been said, the vice president is welcome here. I will give her 3 hours if she wants, live to tape. We'll go to commercial break and come back in. And that's been relayed through the most reliable of vehicles. Friend of the second gentleman has sent that in to him. Because I've been able to talk to Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and all these folks, and I will never forget former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton telling me I should have done your show before the election. You're right. She was right. She should have. All you really need is a civil interviewer. All you really need is someone who will listen and not interrupt. All you really need is someone who understands the realities of television. They may occasionally say, Madam Vice President, we only have 30 minutes. I've got 10 more questions. We won't get to them all, but we do have to move along here. That's okay to do after about 2.5, 3 minutes. But 30 minutes, there ought to be at least 8 exchanges. Do we have an over-under, Dwayne, on how many exchanges?
I'd say 8 or 9 is probably pretty good. To me, the question is how many pushbacks per subject. That's the over-under. How many times does Brett redirect per question?
Well, we'll see. But I wanted to get back to Dwayne and find out what's on Dwayne's world today. What are you doing today?
So I'm going to talk to John Ashbrook of Ruthless podcast.
And about what?
We're going to talk about kind of where the polling sits and if he's team optimism or if he's still kind of hedging his bet. But most importantly, remember the story about the fishing stunt they pulled on J.D. Vance last week?
Yeah, are you going to tell him that we invented that?
We're going to trade fishing stories, yes.
Frozen fishing stories.
We're going to talk about Minnesota on ice the first time.
What year was that?
It had to be. We were still on in the morning, so it had to be.
It was Tim Pawlenty's first election. He won.
It had to be, in early 2001.
Well, it's not hard to find out because he was elected in the first year, and it was months before the election. Tim Pawlenty was governor of Minnesota. There's this thing called Wikipedia, which Kamala Harris apparently uses a lot.
Apparently, Kamala invented Wikipedia.
He was elected in 2003, so we did that interview
04.
in 2003.
Yeah, 03, 04. Yeah.
No, he wasn't governor then. So if he became governor in 03, we had to have done it in 02 because we were not there in the first 3 days of January 03.
Okay.
So it's been 22 years. They stole our bit from 22 years ago.
Except I'm going to contend that our bit was actually funnier.
Oh, it was much funnier.
Yeah. So
it was original. They're derivative. I
Right.
want you to point that. He's a Bengals fan. They're completely derivative of the Browns. So you can also point that out.
We're going to trade fishing stories, which actually could be kind of fun.
Do you know what else is interesting about Ruthless? They're all McConnell. Well, Smug's not really.
Well, and that's part of it too. Is I've known John Ashbrook since 2005 when he first came to work for McConnell.
Did he used to set up the interviews?
He and I used to have a lot of back channels about all sorts of things.
What was he, 4? You're a lot older than Ashbrook.
He's probably maybe 8-9 years younger than I am. Maybe.
Well, I want you to know, as I said, I've got the merch, and I will be deeply disappointed if they send you the merch.
I would be honored to have the merch. I would.
Would you put the merch in the picture?
I would. Yes, I would.
Because you've done nothing to decorate your studio, though you're on every day. It's ugly.
What, this studio, or are you talking
Yeah,
about?
that studio. It's ugly.
Well, I don't do it from here. I do it.
But I mean, you're on every day. You might put a picture up or something.
I have a thing behind me, but it's just not on the camera.
It's electronic. Let me close by saying, when will Dwayne's World post?
It should drop tomorrow morning first thing.
Man, that's late.
Yell at Harley.
I will. All right. But Harley's been doing a bang-up job today. We've already got 3 YouTube videos up, so I'm always impressed. Josh Kroshauer, editor of Jewish Insider, joins me. Josh, do you have small children?
I do. Two young children of elementary school age.
Okay, I just wanted to warn you. I just got a picture of my 2-year-old grandchild, T-Rex Teddy. His mom found him in the garage with a frozen waffle on a scooter, having created chaos with his dad's tools. So I'm just telling you, don't ever turn your back, Josh. That's a little parenting advice. I did not know until this morning that Tammy Baldwin and Sherrod Brown signed a letter highly critical of the Israeli government and calling on the Biden administration to publicly outline a path for the United States to recognize a Palestinian state. Are they crazy?
Well, we've known, Hugh, that both Tammy Baldwin and Sherrod Brown, both of whom are facing very tough re-election bids this year, have been progressives. But what's interesting when you look at the political map this year, Hugh, is that Baldwin especially has taken positions both vis-a-vis the Palestinian state. I think the even more notable one in the Baldwin legislative record is she backed the resolution by Bernie Sanders trying to block military aid to Israel. Which is caught our eye, needless to say. And it comes at a time when almost every other Democrat up for re-election in 2024, whether it's, Tester, Casey, Jackie Rosen, certainly, who's been one of the most pro-Israel lawmakers on the Democratic side in Congress, have been staunch supporters of Israel as it defends itself against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Baldwin has been the outlier. Brown a little bit, but Baldwin has on some key issues broken with the support for Israel. And you mentioned the Palestinian state, but I think the more interesting one is the align with Bernie Sanders to block military aid or some parts of military sales to Israel.
But Josh, there is a not insignificant Jewish American population outside of Cleveland, outside of Columbus, outside of Cincinnati. All of them came to the march in support of Israel. When I went down to the mall to march with people in the fall, there were lots of buses from Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. What is Sherrod Brown thinking? I'm not sure I saw any Madison, Wisconsin. I'm not sure what the Jewish American population is, but I'm sure there are a lot of supporters of Israel who are not Jewish in Wisconsin. This is just bad politics.
Yeah, so Ohio has one of the biggest Jewish populations in the entire country, top 5, top 10, I think. When you look at the data, we talk a lot about what we call the Kishka's test when it comes to fighting against anti-Semitism, supporting Israel. There's some Democrats.
I don't know what Kishka means. Josh,
Kishka
I
is the
don't know
Yiddish
what
word
Kishka means.
it means guts. Do you have it? You know, do you really care about the issue? I mean, there are a lot of lawmakers
Okay.
on various issues that will vote a certain way, but who really has the passion? Who really is there when it counts? And you know, the question about Sherrod Brown is, I think his voting record largely has been in support of Israel, but unlike someone like a Jackie Rosen, even Bob Casey, who has co-sponsored some of the major initiatives fighting anti-Semitism, supporting Israel, Brown has always been a little more progressive and may not have been on the front lines on some of those issues.
Josh, I wanted to ask you, when I had former President Trump on last week, he brought up the fact that there were some Jewish Americans participating in the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah demonstrations. I pointed out, I think they're outliers. Do we have any numbers on what percentage of American Jews are against Israel's existence or think they're misusing their power in Gaza or Lebanon? It's got to be very small.
It's a very fringe figure. There is some polling. It's probably around, you know, low single digits, mid single digits. Support for Israel, broadly speaking, is around 80-90+% of Jewish voters. So these are, you know, there's a lot of tokenism where you do have on some of these campuses, they do try to highlight some of the most radical Jewish students to lead anti-Israel groups. But if you look at the data, if you look at the polling of Jewish voters, of Jewish Americans, 90%, you know, 80-90% plus support for Israel.
Was it fair for me to describe them to the former president as outliers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is
okay,
it's a fringe
good.
view within the Jewish community.
Now I want to go to the call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I don't know what they talked about. You don't know what they talked about. There are leaks from American sources saying that Netanyahu promised not to hit energy or nuclear sites. I don't believe those leaks. I believe those are leaks intended to push Netanyahu. Do you believe the leaks?
I would not believe everything you read. There's a lot of, as you note, Hugh, strategic leaking to make maybe one side, maybe make Iran in this case think Israel's going to do one thing and they may do something else. You know, I think that's American leaking. It was the Washington Post that first broke the story. I think that's probably coming from the American side, given the administration's sense of what Israel might do. But look, I also do think that you do have that call between Biden and Netanyahu. It was the first one in quite some time. And it comes as, you know, we know this from the public rhetoric from this administration. They don't want escalation. They have been urging caution. They transferred missile defense systems to Israel in a sign of their support. But I think that may come with conditions behind the scenes. And I'm not surprised that this is leaking out, that Israel's not or may not go after nuclear and energy sites, because I don't think that's what this administration wants, and they're trying to caution against it.
Now, Josh, I want to close with this. The Prime Minister went on video in English and Hebrew to say to the UN forces, get out. There are more than 24 countries. There might be 36 countries with up to 10,000 observers. They are ineffective. They've done nothing. They are now acting as human shields, not knowingly, but inevitably. It would be reckless disregard for the facts in an American legal system. Do you think Israel will be deterred by their presence after giving fair warning that they've got to get the hell out of the way?
Well, will they be? I think that something will be worked out. I mean, it would not be in Israel's interest to see any UN employees get hurt in any operations in Lebanon, but I think they're trying to work behind the scenes to make sure that that's the case. Look, the UN. This is sort of a UN issue, frankly, because the resolution that codifies a line that would protect Israel and in that southern part of Lebanon is a UN resolution that they should be enforcing, and they're not. So that is something that really irks Israel for good reason, and it doesn't seem like UNIFIL is really doing their job.
Well, there are tunnels under the UNIFIL sites, and yesterday the IDF released, that's a supposition on my part, there was a released photo by the IDF yesterday of a Hezbollah weapons cache very close to a UNIFIL site. So they can't even patrol their own grounds, Josh. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. And Guterres is anti-Semitic. I can only conclude that the UN boss is an anti-Semite.
Welcome to the UN, Hugh. You know this as well as a lot of Americans, that the UN is, represents the interests of bad actors as much as democracies. But look, the problem is, like, President Biden, Vice President Harris also kind of echoed some of the UN concerns. Biden, I think, over the weekend urged Israel to stop its engagement where the UNIFIL positions are in southern Lebanon, and I think the Vice President also. Maybe it was just Biden, but there is a Western criticism as well, and that's what's holding that's what's leading to some of the diplomacy taking place right now.
All right, Josh, important question. You're not a Yankees fan, are you?
No, I'm a Yankees hater, actually.
Good. So we're not distressed by the guard setback last night. I'm not worried. Tanner Bybee tonight versus Cole. Who do you think wins?
Yeah, I mean, Cole has been pitching really well. Bybee is with the de facto ace for the Guardians. I think 1-1. I like Stephen Kwan. I like Jose Ramirez is my fantasy baseball stalwart. So I like the Tribe in game 2.
Oh, you picked Jose this year? Good for you.
I have had.
There's only one player in baseball. There's only one player in baseball better than Jose.
He has been one of my fantasy baseball stalwarts over many years. So yes,
good for you, Josh Kroshauer. I had no idea. You are far more knowledgeable about matters baseball than my producer Dwayne, who doesn't like the Guardians and doesn't know who Jose Ramirez is. Thank you, Josh Kroshauer. Follow him on X at Josh Kroshauer. I want to remind you all that today over at YouTube, if you've just tuned in, I opened up with a monologue on Kamala Harris's plagiarism. I have covered yesterday's side-by-side comparison of Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. I have covered for you on YouTube how dangerous Kamala Harris is. I am spending a lot of time on the election because we are in the middle of voting season. People are voting every day. I just saw that more than 1.6 million votes returned in Pennsylvania already. So I'm hammering it every day because people are voting every day, and you cannot elect Kamala Harris. It's too dangerous. She doesn't have any idea what to do on almost everything. And Trump has been president. You may not like him. You may not like his style, but he knows how to do the job. Maybe he'll bring back Pompeo and Robert O'Brien. Maybe he'll bring back Rick Grinnell and John Ratcliffe. He's got a lot of people to pick from. You can read the letter that they signed. There are 400 people who have got great credentials, ready, willing, and able to step up and fill up the national security positions. They've got the Federalist Society to help them with judges. It's just the future of the country is on the line here. Get out and vote for Trump, Vance, and do it today. I'm busy posting Austin Theriault's website for his campaign website for Maine 2nd District. Good morning, Austin. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. It's great to have you on.
Good morning, Hugh. It's awesome to be on.
I live just outside of the 2nd District, and I'm not a Mainer. I'm a Virginian, but I had a bunch of Mainers over on Monday night, because we're leaving on Saturday for Virginia. They're pretty optimistic about your chances. How do you feel?
We feel really good about our chances. I'll tell you, this election's turning up to be very much tough for anybody who's running as an incumbent, because the past 4 years has been a failure. People want change, and anybody new on the ballot, certainly with experience like myself from the business sector, real life experience, I think is going to put us in a great position going up against Jared Golden. It's not going to be easy. I know we're going to probably get into it, but he's just got buckets of money coming from out of state to try to save his political career. But he's proven to Mainers to be a flip-flopper. He's taken basically on almost every single issue you can think of. He's taken different sides of that issue. And really the thing that bothers me the most is flip-flop on the Second Amendment, because that's a constitutional right. Mainers have long been very, very, very good with their firearms, very safe and responsible, and he's turned their back on them, and it's a huge issue especially for us in the 2nd District.
Austin, my colleagues at WGAN 98.5 News Talk and 560 AM down in Portland, they tell me that you're going to win. and they're pretty knowledgeable. But money goes a long way. How is the money situation? Let's give it's austinforcongress.com, right? AUSTIN for Congress.com. Is that it? Or is it Austin for Maine?
It's austinformaine.com. And there's a donation link there. But here's the deal, as you mentioned, one of the people that's been pouring a lot of money, I think directly and indirectly, is Michael Bloomberg into the campaign. And Michael Bloomberg's been an anti-Second Amendment, anti-gun billionaire, and he's not afraid to put his money where his mouth is on this issue. So that's sort of the folks that we're up against. George Soros is some of his families donated directly to Jared Golden and stuff. So we're running a grassroots campaign. I mean, to be honest, I think we've raised more money in Maine than any other congressional candidate in the 2nd District ever. So we're doing well. We've just got to close the gap with folks from out of state, because they can make a huge difference in this race. And I don't know if you saw, there was an article in the Portland Press Herald a few days ago, and it was interesting they actually said this, because they're really not on our side typically, but they said Maine 2nd District race will probably control the balance of Congress. So there's a lot of eyes on this race, and we're doing everything we can to win, and we could certainly use the extra help.
I only bring on candidates that the NRCC tells me are, 1, important to the national map, and 2, are either ahead or tied. That's why Austin is on. So your money invested in Austin goes a long way. Austin, give people your brief bio, would you? I know it. Everyone in Maine knows it, but tell people about it.
Well, I come from a logging and farming family up in the northern part of the state of Maine. Very, very, very tough for a lot of folks up there back in the day, generations ago. Think about the opportunities that were there. Basically, if you didn't farm or you didn't go in the woods and log, it was going to be a tough haul for you. So my grandparents and the folks before them taught me everything that I know about making sacrifices for your community, working hard. Fortunately, I was born in a family that taught me all those values. So I was able to have a career in NASCAR for a period of time. Won a championship in 2017 in the American Race Car Association tour, which was a tour that traveled across the country, basically right within NASCAR. And came back to Maine after traveling the country for quite a few years, and said, this is not the state that I remember. There's a lot that we have to fight for. Obviously, the state of Maine's been under Democrat control for many years. The governor right now is under Democrat control. The House and the Senate is. So I ran for state office and won. I actually won a seat that had been held by Democrats for probably 50 or 60 years. So we're on the right track. I'm doing what I can to fight back and obviously bring common sense values.
Austin, this is important. It's a ranked voting state, which is nuts. I don't understand it. I'm a lawyer. I've been teaching con law for 30 years. Is it better just to vote one person on the ranked vote, or should you vote 2 people and somebody not named Jared Golden as number 2? What's better?
Well, we've been telling people to just vote all the way across, just vote all the circles, vote for the same person. There's been a lot of misinformation out there over the years where I think they want people to vote, for a different person, and ultimately it helps the other side. So just vote for one person all the way across, and you can check circle those circles on the ballot. And even in like the presidential race, there's actually 7 circles. So it's very confusing, but we recommend people to do that. And if folks want to go to austinformaine.com and help us out, that would make a big difference.
Austin, AUSTINFOR Maine.com, austinformaine.com. Come back in the closing days, Austin. We're paying very close attention to the 2nd District.